Hubris and politics. And this message has been a long time in coming. And one of the reasons for that is that for over the last, decade with politics, I was trying to think if I had ever had one good conversation about politics. And I can't remember one, but I've had a 1,000 starts, and then the same ridiculousness happens. And I know that I have kind of strayed away from talking about politics on this channel. And the reason is anytime that I even get close to politics, the way it is now, like the ugliness of politics, they slime my comments, and then I feel like I'm part of the uselessness of that energy, what I'm giving. But this one hubris was a large part of what I saw in the nuttiness of the federal elections in the United States. And this was, but this isn't really about politics. It's just that happens to be a great place to look at hubris and how it plays out. So before I start talking about those kind of things, I wanted to kind of share the metaphor that feels the best for me in understanding, because life and reality is very abstract in nature. So it's like when you're on the spiritual path, we have awakenings, aha moments, and we just think, oh yeah, I'm there, I got it now. And then life happens, and then you're just like, I don't have anything. I'm lost. I'm trying to find, like, what's the thread again that I'm going for, and awakening and aha after aha and all of these things. And this is my experience, and maybe other people just wake up and they're awoke. I don't know. The Eckhart Tolle story, that would be one. But this is my adventure, and I'm sharing it as a means of just sharing my experience and the helpfulness. Because to me, I'm finding that the tangibility of the process is so helpful in like finding a new platform, because what we're leaving, wherever we leave on to a conscious path, we are leaving a foundation of our personal identity and moving to somewhere else. So some people may have had less personal identification to get rid of, maybe had more personal identification to get rid of. So the metaphor of the keyhole is, for me, the most salient and the easiest and the straight, tangible understanding of consciousness and understanding better. And so it's just like a metaphor for how this works. And so 2 years ago, Chelsea and I found Paradigm B. And the reason for Paradigm B was because there was this other world and this other experience that we had found. And there's all these different overlays, all the spiritual overlays, the psychological, the philosophical, the religious overlays of finding this other truth, this other way of looking at reality. And even just saying truth can be biting, because people are like, wow, who knows the truth? And blah, blah, blah. So it's the tangibility of what I'm talking about. So a simple B was the symbol that, hey, there's this other way that we can experience reality. If you want to go and explore this other one, this is the overlay that we've put together. And that's Paradigm B. And that's what's been flushing itself through us in this process. And so kind of the way to say it is, this is how I would look at my journey. This is my personal journey, and then see if it relates with your personal journey and how it might relate. So, when I was introduced to God, I was raised Catholic, and I just had a lot of questions. Love Jesus, love Jesus. I was like, oh, that feels good. Jesus feels good. And then I saw Catholicism and where it was going outside, just how beautiful it could be at church and get in the parking lot and everybody's not kind to each other. And so I kind of I still felt really good about Jesus, but I just kind of went and lived within what I would call paradigm A. I lived the mainstream mind. I was watching the news. I was following along, doing politics, doing life, trying to do marriage, trying to do a family. And it wasn't until near the end of my marriage where I found spirituality, another overlay that made sense to me. And then the pieces started to come together. And so the best analogy, the way I can see it, is like there is this sphere, and it is what I would call paradigm A. And that is just mainstream mind, living from the mind, like whatever we've put together logically to make this world make sense, it lives within paradigm A. And then outside of that is this reality. And it's kind of like you have to find the edge of this other sphere on paradigm A. So the way I see it is that paradigm B was always there. I was just not conscious of it. I was living out a structured life, laid down a blueprint by my parents, by people I came into contact with, and so I didn't even really know that there was this other thing, that we have these ideas, become a monk, shave off your head, shave off your hair, become bald, sit on a mountainside, and that's kind of like, okay, they're going for enlightenment, and I'm like, no, I'm going to win this paradigm A game. And so I can see it now. It's like there was always a light, and I was touched by the light. I was touched by, the message of Jesus. I was touched in ways that felt it. So I kind of see this ray of light going through paradigm A that's showing this other paradigm B. And what it seems to me when we look at all the overlays, the spiritual, the psychological, the philosophical, the religious overlays to get there, it seems like that these kind of paths found a piece of the light and then decided with the mind, a lot of them decided, we are right within paradigm A. But what I see that as is people found a piece of the light, but they never saw where the light was coming from. And then they paradigm A'd it and said, this is it. We write it down onto a book, and then we all just try to figure it along. And probably the biggest piece of truth for me was understanding and starting to look into the history of especially Christianity, because, I grew up in the United States and was Catholic and was very interested in Christianity, that I started to realize that religion followed along with paradigm A. That the understanding that they used to talk about reincarnation within Catholicism, which was not something I was taught in school. And so, there was this, that there was, if it was truth, it would blast right through. That if somebody were holding the perfect truth, then it would just stay solid. That truth would always be true. And there's probably a lot of people that considered themselves Christians who had found where the light was coming from, but paradigm A was so loud and people were so fantastical in the idea of being right And then the insistence on personal identification, that they said, we don't believe you. We have to give up all this stuff in order to believe you. So we're all just going to keep around this light, and then we are going to say, we're the better ones and they're the worse ones. And don't listen to anybody else who saw little parts of the light. They're wrong, and you shouldn't do it that way. So, but it makes it understandable, and it's not a criticism. I was right there in it. If it is a criticism, then I'm criticizing myself. I was right in that same thing. And then I found bigger, paths that said there's a light and follow it, like alchemy. And then I had a mentor who was a Christian mentor who showed me in the Bible where the keyhole was. And then I started learning about non-duality and all of these other things that finally I was like, I found it. Like, all the importance in one of my awakenings was all the importance that and the pressure of paradigm A, like, just dissolved from me in an instant. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, I'm free. I'm totally free. And for a while after that, I was just like, woohoo, like, no pressure. This is it. I found paradigm B. I wasn't calling it paradigm B. But then all of a sudden, I started getting depression, and these things that I felt like I had gone through were coming back into my life. And then, I'm saying, hey guys, I found this keyhole, and like the people I was on spiritual paths with were like, yeah, whatever, you just had another awakening. And I'm like, no, like, I want to explain it to you. And when I would try to explain it to them, I'm like, they would argue back to me as if I was wrong. And I'm like, I'm not trying to be right. I'm trying to make a path to the keyhole. And but then I came to recognize that, like, until you're ready to see the keyhole, you're not going to see the keyhole. So what happens when you get to the keyhole? So the way I would explain it, the 4 years after that, I'm sitting here talking to you, and it's probably 4.5 years now. And it's like, you go back into paradigm A, and we live inside the same sphere. And if most of the people are still living within paradigm A, you're influenced, and you're still living life within this paradigm, kind of having an understanding of this stuff out of here. Because paradigm A people don't want to really talk about ideas and beliefs that are beyond their grasp. And so what I found as I really went into my mind was that my mind was playing like a runner between both of these worlds. Sometimes it's still playing the judger and wanting to play God from a personal identity. And then there's this other side of me that's just like, gets it, gets love, gets us out of the dualistic trap. And the dualistic bind. It's like, that's, to me, non-duality is actually the Trinity. To me, it's, now I'm understanding that what non-duality allows us to do is, when we give our will over to this other paradigm, you can call it God, but to make it simple, we just give it away from our personal identity. You get a new signal that moves you through time and making choices. And I began to understand, like, when I am paradigm A-ing it and when I'm paradigm B-ing it. And so the talk today is going to be about understanding paradigm A from a hubris idea. And I had a mentor who actually introduced me to this idea and practice it all the time, in that when I start to look inside what my mind wants to devour, because my mind is a very intellectual, linear, logical kind of mind, and it wants to put down, and it wants to do the judging. It wants to say there's a right side and a wrong side. And politics is a fantastic way for the mind to do that judging. So the idea of hubris. Hubris is the excess celebration in a victory. But to me, the way I see it is that it is a celebration at the wrong time. And my mentor used the, after they called the first or second Iraq war, I think it was the second one, they had a huge ceremony with a gigantic banner that said mission accomplished. And, now we know that mission was not accomplished at all. And so that would be an act of hubris. And so what is hubris? And then I started looking at what is hubris. And hubris is us needing to be right, us needing one-upmanship over our fellow man, to have a need to win an idea, a need to win over an opponent, and it's celebrating the individual self, not the collective self. It is the MMA fighter who, after a victory, goes up and puts it in their opponent's face. An act of respect, you could say, sportsmanship, understanding, and that's the bigger part, is when you respect your opponent, you're respecting the game, and you're respecting something much bigger. And so how does this show up in politics? And this is why it drove me, it frustrated me to not be able to, we all want to kind of have a voice in whatever's popular. And or maybe you didn't. I'm just going to say for me, I was kind of interested. And I'm like, okay, we've got this polarization. We've got these characters playing out. Let's have a discussion. And what I learned over this last 10 years is nobody wants to listen. Nobody wants to have a conversation. It was all about being right. And so for me, and maybe a lot of people shared this frustration with me, and I don't think I've ever voiced this, that the frustration I had all along was not being able to have conversations and with anybody. Because if you said anything that went against their narrative, like, la, 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 I don't have any, I'm not hearing it. And what was infuriating about that was that it was their hubris that was actually getting the outcome that they want, or they didn't want. And so when the election came around, to me, I was more bottled up at that moment, and definitely not, it was perfect. The universe put me in a situation that pulled me away from my Zen and personally, and then the election happens and put me into this anxiety of the results of what's going to happen. And the part that was frustrating, or the part that hurt me, wasn't necessarily what the outcome of the election was. It was the unconscious hubris that was going to be taking place after the event. And it was because there was hubris playing constantly throughout it. That's why people had their faces right up against the TV, and their social media every single day was an act of just trying to get over on and be righter than their fellow man. And their hubris was just extraordinary. It's been going on for 10 years in our country. And so hubris as a method of me checking in with my thoughts. If I am actually looking out the keyhole when I am acting or responding or thinking about the thoughts, I think, am I trying to be right in a certain situation? And then I had to start, and what I practiced in this was I found the characters that were the most challenging to me in the political sphere, and started to trying to look at them from a further vantage point. And what's interesting is when you're able to do that is the clarity that you get of the character that you're looking at and what role they're playing in the grand scheme of things. And you can see how they operate. And there were a lot of characters that they were kept alive because of their enemy status. And that's when I realized that there were characters that was just so clear. I'll let you figure out who these characters are for yourself. But if you look at these characters, the thing that they were the most afraid of being taken away from them was your attention. And had people been able to see that that's all they had to do was take their attention away from these people, and they would have done the worst thing to their enemy. So it came to me that it's this interesting point of view that if we look at it from a point of view of how you didn't hate your enemy, because people were very open with who they hated during this whole craziness. And I didn't have the words back then, but it's like, do you realize that the worst thing you can do to that enemy, to that character playing that role, is to take your attention away from them? And from this point of view, I can see you didn't hate him enough. If you had hated him enough, what you would have done is walked away. You would have taken your attention away from them, and that is the thing that they feared the most. So in truth, you didn't either hate them enough, or you could have if you had walked away, you would have walked away in love. It's an interesting hate-love bind right there. That's interesting to explore. So hubris, and how I use it as a way of making sure that I'm looking through the keyhole, whether or not I'm looking through the keyhole with my thoughts, or am I back down just being another little judger saying, I think that one's right. I think that one's right. I think that one's right. Hubris. It's a great, and it shows up in so much of our lives, and it shows up in so many of our conversations. And how do we talk about that? Well, I'm talking about it here. But how do we bring it up that, because now I can say, when people say, I hate so-and-so, it's like, well, you don't hate them enough. Because if you hated them enough, you would do the thing that scares them the most, which is to take away their attention. Take away your attention from them. That's the thing that they're fearful of. I think I'll leave this video here. Anyway, I love discussion questions, so if this seeded anything for you, either send me a message or leave a comment. I hope you're having a wonderful day. See you in the light.